All right, so we just looked at 3 example measures, and we're going to continue on to the 4th. This is going to be a timeline period measure. Again, also long form, because as I said, they tend to always be long form. But this is going to be set up as a population, which is essentially a count of things over time. Okay, so we're going to be seeing what a count measure looks like for a timeline period temporal class measure. And we're going to go outside of our population health milieu for a second here and look at a surgical measure. Okay, so here we have a measure, monthly count of surgical episode starts. This surgical episode start, I mean, you often you see the word episode, you might think, well, this is going to be a period of time, but actually, for our purposes, we're just counting the starts of these episodes, and so you can think of the numerator here as being an event, essentially. But the denominator, and when you're counting events, it's necessary to specify the sort of size of the well, in this case, what's going to end up being the denominator, but the time that the elapsed time you're counting up these events, such that you can describe them with a number that has some sort of meaning. So, if I say there are there are 10 surgical episode starts, your next question is, well, 10 per what? So if it's 10 per month, that's very different than 10 per day or 10 per year. Okay, so inherently in these count measures, where the subject of the counting is an event, you need to specify the this sort of scaling factor of the denominator. And really, what is happening in the case of a count measure where you're counting events is you have this this timeline period structure where instead of a period of time during which a patient meets some inclusion criteria, you just have this sort of universal period of time that you're counting events in, whether it's admissions or, in this case, surgical episode starts or labs or anything else that can be sort of distilled down into a single moment or single date. All right, so this is all to say that in a sort of maybe initially counterintuitive way, when you're creating a measure to count events, the event in that case is in the numerator, and what's in the denominator are these this special timeline period, this sort of universal timeline period, but a timeline period nonetheless, representing these chunks of time during which we're going to capture the numerator event to generate the essentially the rate per some unit of elapsed time, which is what a count measure is. All right, so digging into the measure here, we see that we are using timeline period here, and you can also see that this count measure checkbox has been checked. So this is a useful shortcut. You can construct a measure as a count measure in the sort of standard way, but because this is a pretty common type of measure to want to create a count measure, using this checkbox is sort of a shortcut. It builds a bunch of the stuff behind the scenes and only asks you the questions that are still relevant after some of the structure has been fixed to be a count. And one of the nice things that happens when you select count measure is you get these little parenthetical hints that remind you that, okay, if what you want to do is to count events, you want to use a timeline period temporal structure. We're going to see a little later if you wanted to create a population of entities, what that would look like. But here we're talking about event counts, and again, the denominator in a event count is a period of time, and therefore we're using the timeline period temporal structure here. Yeah, okay, so in this case, what you want to think, what we see in the on the left nav here is the numerator, essentially. You can see we've still got the numerator nomenclature here, NB for numerator base, and L1 numerator linked 1. We don't see the denominator because the denominator is this sort of special one-off timeline period object, which is going to be sort of the same for every event count measure, and so we've hidden it from view. Okay, so we do need to tell URSA what date associated with this stack of objects, but essentially this event, we want to tell URSA which date on this event to use as the anchor date, the date that's going to define when that numerator instance happened for the purpose of assigning observations to, say, reporting segments. So in this case, we're using the, well, let's take a quick look at what this measures, what's going on in this measure. So this is a monthly count of surgical episode starts. What's happening is we're using institutional claims and narrowing those down to only those that have a, I'm sorry, the numerator base here is the ICD 9 or 10 procedure codes that might appear on an institutional claim. We're narrowing those down to only those ICD 9 or 10 codes that meet our URSA standard definition of a surgical procedure, and then we're collapsing the numerator down to one record per surgery, essentially one record per claim, but one record mostly per surgery. You definitely find cases where maybe there are multiple surgeries performed under the same claim, but we're sort of eliding that complexity here. But in any case, the basic idea here is you can think of this short stack of objects as an event, one row per claim, where that claim met this standard of having a procedure code that was deemed to be a surgical procedure, and we're going to be assigning that to the reporting segments based on the effective date, on the claim covered date, which we're setting as the effective date. We're calling this an episode because each surgery is just assumed to kick off some episode. But essentially, you can think of this as a count of surgical encounters, something like that. Okay, and yeah, the numerator and denominator contributions are should look pretty similar to what we saw in the PMPM measure. Now, the sort of the unit scale of the measure here is months. Again, it's a monthly count of these surgeries, and so we're using this elapsed time pattern with the months parameter set. The numerator component contribution is a little bit different. Now this is, instead of adding up the dollar contributions of a claim, each claim here is just saying, well, this claim has a surgical procedure on it, so I'm going to assume there's just a one surgery here, and because we're adding events and not dollars or something, the idea here is it's just this binary result. If no claim meeting the numerator standard was found, that's a contribution of 0. If for everyone that it was found, they contribute 1. Now you don't see that aggregation function here simply because that is sort of assumed based on the count measure being set to what it is to be a sum. Okay, so these some of these knobs and switches are being set automatically by URSA upon selection of this count measure checkbox, which again is sort of a shortcut for creating these count measures. Okay, so this is an example of a timeline period measure, but different than the PM measure in the sense that this is now a count measure. It's a count of events